One man's secret recipe became another's silence. Welcome to Wolfe Mysteries, where I'm your host. Drop a quick comment with your location. I love connecting with this mystery-hungry crew. Your support keeps these tales alive. Let's dig in. Timing's a sneaky beast. A man shows up before 9 a.m. He's either in a panic or a uniform. The guy ringing our bell at 8:43 a.m. was neither. His suit was too new for his weathered face, his shoes too scuffed for his tie, and while he wasn't panicked, he was sweating like he'd run from Jersey. I opened the door, aiming for welcoming, but probably hitting somewhere between curious and coffee-starved. "Goodwin," he said, breathless. "Archie Goodwin, that's me. You here for the orchids, the eggs, or the detective? Pick one." "I need Mr. Wolfe," he said. "Please, it won't take long." I raw sausage. That stopped me. Not because I'm wild for breakfast meats. I'm a steak and eggs guy when I can swing it, but because offering sausage to Nero Wolfe is like handing a valet your keys and expecting no side eye. I stepped aside, letting him in. He clutched a brown paper sack, grease staining the bottom, holding it with the reverence of a man carrying a relic or a grenade dot at the front room's threshold. Fritz poked his head out from the kitchen, eyeing the guy like he'd tracked mud near the stove. "Fritz," I said, "we've got a sausage situation." "I see that," Fritz replied, sniffing the air like a bloodhound at a diner. "And I smell caraway, oof." Our visitor's confidence waned. "It's a family recipe, you thought wrong," I cut in, keeping it light as I steered him down the hall. "Follow me, don't expect a parade." In the office, Nero Wolfe sat in his yellow leather chair, a throne of pure reason. He didn't look up, not at that hour. He was deep in his second breakfast, a poached egg, a toasted muffin, and a glare. "For anyone who disrupted him before 10 o'clock, Mr. Wolfe," I announced, "this is a man with sausage and a problem. I can't speak for the sausage, but the problem looks authentic." Wolfe lifted his eyes just high enough to acknowledge the intrusion, which for him was practically a salute. "Achy, remove that parcel from me, office, it offends." I'm sorry," the man stammered, clearly rattled. "I didn't mean to offend. I thought. It might help convince you to take the case." Wolfe arched an eyebrow. "A case of what, sausage poisoning?" "No, sir," he said. "My name is Anton Mazur, Irun Miskar's Meats on 10th Avenue. I believe someone is trying to ruin me and possibly kill me." That got Wolfe to blink, a slow, deliberate one. He didn't love being interrupted, but he hated being misled more, I suppose. Wolfe said, folding his napkin with disdain, "that you intend to elaborate." Anton Masker nodded, eagerly setting the brown bag on the edge of Wolfe's desk like an offeringi, nudged it off and onto the credenza before Wolfe set fire to it with his icy inherited. "The business from my uncle who died last year," Misa said. "I make everything by hand. Bretva Kilbussa mears its niche, but it pays, at least it did until 3 weeks ago. That's when strange things began. Happening. You are not the first man," Wolfe said, "to be pursued by sausages." "No, not sausages, miss." Corrected. "Customers started getting sick. A little at first, bad stomach dishes. I tested everything twice. Nothing's wrong with the product. Then last Thursday, a health inspector showed up with an anonymous complaint and shut me down." "Anonymous," I said. "That's always convenient. I can't prove anything," Ma continued, "but someone's sabotaging me. Munkle had rivals, some ugly ones, but he also had secrets. Of course he did." I muttered, "It wouldn't be fun otherwise." Wolfe sighed loud and operatic. "This is not a matter for a detective. You require legal counsel or a better cleaning grege. I've spoken to my lawyer," he says. "Unless I can prove it's deliberate sabotage, the health department won't back down. I thought you could investigate who's behind it." I'll pay whatever you require. That last part got Wolfe to sit up straighter by a full inchy. Don't chase food criminals, Wolfe said. If your sausages are as innocent as Yutlam, you'll be exonerated in time. I'm not just talking about business sabotage, ma said. I think whoever is doing this killed. My Uncle Wolfe paused, and his eyes went very still. Go on, my uncle. Eric Messer died in his sleep, heart failure. They said he was 61 and not exactly the healthiest. But I found something in his ledger, a coded note, something about the cold room and 3 names not to forget. I tried to figure it out, but before I could, someone broke into the shop, didn't steal a thing, just moved things. Rearranged my spice racks, replaced my padlocks, left me a note in butcher paper. Some secrets should stay buried. That did it. Wolfe turned his head slowly toward me. Archie, if you can endure a morning without tormenting me with speculative fiction, make arrangements for a trip to 10th Avenue. No, for Mr. Mesker to return tomorrow at 11. I will decide then if his sausages and his secrets warrant further interest. MSR looked both relieved and bewildered. You'll help me, I said. I will decide. Wolfe corrected. Leave the parcel outside. When he was gone, I dropped the bag on the stoop and dusted off my hands like I'd just removed a corpse. Wolfe leaned back, the tips of his fingers meeting like they always did when he was pretending not to care. Sausages, Archie said, always underestimated until they're not. I nodded, and when they come wrapped with mystery-coded ledgers and midnight spice rearrangements, I guess they're your kind of meat. Don't be fatuous. Who, me? I grinned. I'm just savoring the case, or at least the appetizer. The next morning, at precisely 11 o'clock, Anton Messer was back, in the office, his hands folded tightly in his lap, like he was waiting for the verdict in a murder trial, and he might have been, depending on what Wolfe would find buried beneath his talk of coded ledgers and butcher paper warnings. Wolfe didn't greet him. He didn't even glance at him. He sat in his oversized throne behind the disguise, half-littered in fingertips, joined, looking like a man expecting confession rather than conversation. I took the client's statement, per usual, with my notebook on one knee and one eye on Wolfe for any sudden signs of life. Misa's story, the second time around, didn't get any prettier. My Uncle Eric was careful, he said, about recipes, supplistilevisor. Everything. He had this habit of keeping notes that didn't look like notes, codes, initials. He trusted no one, not even me yet, left the business to I pointed out. He had no one else. I was the only blood relative who didn't owe him money or want to punch him, and I worked there since I was 16. Wolfe gave a sound like a reluctant puff of wind. This note. You have it, Ms. Reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and unfolded a thin, yellowing sheet of paper. It looked like it had once been part of a ledger, torn roughly from the binding. Scrawled on it, in tight, nervous handwriting, was Cold Room 3. Namesnat. To forget SRT of JM Sausages speak. Watch what they say. He handed it to me and I took it over to Wolfe, who accepted it between 2 fingers like I'd passed him a used handkerchief. He scanned I-tense, then closed his eyes. You believe this connects to your uncle's death? I do something about that note scared him. A week before he died, he was jumpier than I'd ever seen him, and the night happiest I remember, because I was the one who locked up the shop. He said to me, if anything happens, you mind that room, by which Wolfe said you assume he meant thickled room. He had a walk-in refrigerator in the back of the shop, locked, always locked. Even I didn't have your key until after he died. Did you examine it? Of course. I found nothing unusual, just the meat inventory. But then the break-in happened. Someone tampered with that lock, not forced it, but replaced it and rearranged everything inside. That's what got to me. It's not just about making me look incompetent Somians, hiding something. Wolfe took a deep breath, which in his case was akin to a standing ovation. You said you were shut down. Yes, the health department came in with a tip and found a trace of listeria in one of the prep trays, but I clean obsessive lith tray had already been sterilized the night before. I think someone planted it. Have you any idea who might benefit from your ruin? Misa didn't hesitate. There are 3, maybe 4 other artisanal sausage shops in Manhattan that see me as competition, but if I had to pick, Onid. Say Salvador Roas. He runs La Ricasa, a trendy Latin charcuterie spot down in the West Village. We had words. Last year, Munkle accused him of stealing a recipe. Wolfe raised an eyebrow, which meant I was cleared to speak. Sounds like a good place to start, I said. Him and the 2 others on that list, DT, could be Dominic. He runs a supplier warehouse in the Bronx, used to deliver our dry spice sand pork trimmings, but he suddenly cut us off last month. No explanation, and SGM say hesitated that one might be Jane Morrissey. She's an attorney used to handle my uncle's business contracts, but they had a falling out. She accused him of misrepresenting income. I see, Wolfe murmured, setting the note aside. Mr. Goodwin, I was already getting to my feety. No West Village first, discreetly. Wolfe added, no declarations, no confrontation. Observe and report, see what sausages say. MSEA blinked. You believe me? I believe that sausages, as you put it, speak, Wolfe said, and often fought those who wished to remain silent. I showed Meska out and gave him a reassuring pattern. The shoulder he was still wrung tight as butcher's twine will sniff something out. I told him, don't go grinding your own worries into links just yet on the sidewalk. I flagged a cab and headed to Larissa, a boutique storefront with dark wood paneling, gold lettering on the window, and music playing softly. It sounded like a flirtation. The place smelled good. I'll give them that. Chorizo and rosemary plus something smoky and unfamiliar. Bend the glass counter stood Salvador Rojas, mid-40s, fit shirt too tight and smile too wide. He was slicing dry-cured lammo with the practiced ease of a man who knew both his product and his charm. Archie Goodwin, I said, handing over enough our cards. I'm not here for sausage, I'm here about Eric Messer. The name didn't truffle him, but the pause between slices got a little longer. He's dead. Roa Sadie is his nephew. Thinks it wasn't entirely natural. Rojas shrugged, hurt. Trouble, wasn't it? The man lived off Bratwa. In spite, he also left a coded note with 3 sets of initials. Yours was one, really? Rojas smiled then. I feel flattered. I didn't kill him, if that's what you're implying. I didn't even like it. Man, tell me about this recipe theft business. That's old noise. He accused me of stealing a paprika blend, I said. His memory was failing, and we left it there. Ray, don't sabotage people, Mr. Goodwin. I don't need to. I looked around. There were customers browsing artisan mustards, hand-smoked almonds. Someone's trying to-shot miscus meats down. I said, health complaints, break-ins. He wouldn't know anything about that. I wouldn't, he said smoothly. But if I were you, I'd ask someone who lost something when MSCA took over, like anyone who owed Eric money, or anyone whose name ended up in his ledger. He had records going back decades. That was a tip, intentional or not, and I didn't miss the way Ro's eyes narrowed. When he said ledger, I gave him a nod and turned toward the door. Oh, Mr. Goodwin, yeah, I suggest you tell Mr. Wolfe not to stick his nose too deep in sausage casings. Sometimes they snap. That was colorful. I jotted it down in my head as I got in the cab and dialed the brownstone. Wolfe answered on the second ring, which for him was essentially sprinting to the phone. He didn't flinch. I told him, but he's hiding something he knows about the ledger, and he's not fond of the miscuses. Then observe protocol. Wolfe said, we will see what the other names have to say. I leaned back in the seat, already turning over the next movie supplier, who suddenly dropped a client, an EX attorney with a grudge, a note scribbled in a dead man's ledger warning that sausages speak, and somewhere rearranging spice jars like they were writing a message in cumin ansage. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about sausage, it was about secrets. Once that were about to spoil, I caught Dominic Trento just as he was finishing a heated phone call in his cluttery desk above a spice warehouse in the Bronx. He was a stocky guy in a cable-knit sweater with a neck like a bulldog's and a permanent scowl. He probably inherited from his grandfather, along with the business shelves. Behind him held enough smoked paprika and dried fennel to marinate the state of New Jersey. He looked up at me like I was the second tax audit of the morning. You frowned, IRS. Nope, worse. I said, Private Detective Archie Goodwin. I'm working with Nero Wolfe. That didn't smooth his expression any. If anything, it added a little suspicion to the scowl. What's Wolfe want with me? I'm clean. I handed over a card and sat down without being asked. We're looking into some irregularities around Mises meets the late Eric Miz left a few names behind before he died. Yours wasn't of them that earned me a grunt. Not a guilty one, more like the kind that says, of course, I'm on someone's list. I do business. I cut him off last month. Trento said, that's no crime. I had my reasons, mind sharing them. He started targeting Kai about payment, started ordering in smaller batches, but always with last-minute changes. A spice mix one day, pure salt the next. Then he came in here screaming about bad clove in a shipment. I never even sensed sounds unstable or paranoid. Either way, not good for my rep. My warehouse runs on consistency. If a guy can't keep his orders straight, he doesn't get service in-ordered. Did he ever mention a cold room or make odd references to watching what sausages say that got a flicker note alarm? More like recognition. He didn't want me to notice he was Alois muttering about the old deals. Trento said too many hands was stirring the pot. Honestly, I figured he was losing his grip, but now he's dead and his nephew's crying sabotage that you didn't hear it from me, I said, but someone planted a tainted tray in his shop to get it shut down. I didn't. Dofford never said you did, but I'm telling you, if someone did, it wasn't about sausages. Ma was holding on to summer things, something old, my guess. Whatever it was, it died with him. That would have mad things easier, sure, but we weren't that lucky by the time I left. Trento's Thuind had picked up, and the city smelled like someone had spilled pepper oil in a subway vent. I caught a cab and made a quick detour. Before heading back to the brownstone, there was one name left on the list. Jane Moresi, and I didn't want to show up at Wolfe's doorstep until I had something conclusive to offer, or at least a fresh contradiction to hang a theory on. Morris's office was in a slim glass paneled building near Columbus Circle. Legal aid, small-time contracts, the kind of lawyer you call when a family business starts to look like a liability. I showed the receptionist my license and got waved in after a 10-minute wait filled with aggressive ferns and motivational posters. Jana Morrissey was in her early burgundy shoot, wearing a burgundy suit that matched her lipstick, and said she was used to being the smartest person in most rooms. Shouldn't look surprised to see me, which is a look I've learned to be suspicious of, Mr. Goodwin, she said, offering her hand. You're early. I'm also charming and stubborn, but we can get to that later. She smiled like someone who didn't entirely disagree. Let me guess, you're here about Eric. I'm her. About a note Eric left behind, your initials were on it, along with two others. He seemed to think you were worth remembering. That sounds like Eric, paranoid to the end. Look, I used to handle his contracts, leases, vendor disputes, payroll filings, nothing dramatic until he decided I was part of some conspiracy to bankrupt him. Was he wrong? Of course, he was wrong. She said, sitting forward, the man hid money, not always well. I found discrepancy flesh. Them and asked for clarification. He responded by calling me a snake and firing me. Any idea what the discrepancies were about? He hesitated, just long enough for me to catch it. I can't say for certain, but there were cash withdrawals, large ones that didn't correspond to inventory or payroll. I asked if he was paying off old debts. He said it was none of my business. Maybe it wasn't, but it didn't look like supplier payments. Did it look like hush money? She didn't answer that. Instead, she reached into her desk and pulled out a thin, flat folder. I kept this in case Emone came asking, she said, because I had a feeling his books weren't just sloppy. They were layered. There were row notes that referenced years I'd never seen, clients that didn't exist. I think kept 2 sets of records, the real ones and the ones he showed me. I opened the folder and skimmed the copy she'd made. The paper smelled like toner and old secrets. There were line items marked with only codes, CR7D5X and SJ, private Eric earring, every 3rd month for 2 years. He was laundering money, I said, or hiding it. She replied, but hiding it from who? That's the real question. I left Morsosophus with the folder tucked under my arm and my mind racing with a dozen half-formed theories. Back in the cab, I called Fritz and told him to hold dinner. I didn't want to walk into Wolfe's office, still chewing pork loin, while he dismantled me for poor syntax. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was where I'd left him, stationary, centered and mildly disdainful of the outside world. He laid out everything: Rois's veiled threats, Trento's warning about old deal, and Morris's confession that Eric was keeping secret ledgers and laundering cash. Wolfe didn't interrupt once, which meant either he was impressed or he was planning to destroy my logic in a single sentence. When I finished, he asked only one question: did you retrieve a sample from the cold room? Nope, not yet. Then go back tomorrow, Wolfe said. With gloves, bring a portion of each sausage batch, still sealed. Planning to taste test, planning to examine. Taste is irrelevant. What matters is variance. If one batch differs from another, then either the recipe was altered or the meat, and if the meat's been tampered with, then we no longer have sabotage, waiver, concealed crime. I sat back, whistling low. You think the cold room shiding more than bratwurst? I think Wolfe said that Anton Meza inherited Mortana shop, and whatever his uncle was protecting, someone wants it. Silence sedimentally. I looked at the note again, still resting on Wolfe's desk. 3 Nama sausages speak, and just like that, the room seemed a little colder the next morning. Left the house early enough to make Fritz grumble and Wolfe issue a martyred sigh at my absence from the breakfast table. I skipped eggs, shaved, and headed straight to 10th Avenue. Antonza had agreed to meet me at the shop, to let me back into the cold room. He sounded both eager and uneasy over thephone, which, if you ask me, is the correct cocktail of emotions when you suspect your late uncle may have been smuggling more than just fennel and nutmeg. The front of MSR's meats was still the iron grate halfway down, like the place was trying to decide whether to stay closed forever or just for the weekend. Anton met me at the side door. He looked tired, creased around thighs, and wearing the same clothes as yesterday, unless he had an affection for grey wool vests that was bordering on pathological. Thanks for coming, he said, unlocking the door. I didn't want to be in there alone again. Is it haunted? I asked, stepping inside, because if it is, I charge double for exorcisms. It's not haunted, he said, but he didn't sound completely sure. But the cold room, something wrong about it. We passed through the main shop, display cases, empty counters, white shelves cleaned with a kind of dedication that either meant deep guilt or deep nerves. The cold room was at the back, behind a heavy insulated steel door. Anton produced a large brass key and handed it to me. "This is the new lock after the asterisk. Break in." I had it changed. I nodded and slid the key into the lock. The door clicked open with a hiss of pressure. The cold hit immediately. Dry, clean, and sharp interior was pristine, tiled, lit by a single overhead bulb. Racks of cured and sausage hung from hooks like little meaty pendulums. Everything was labelled, wrapped, tagged by date and batch. On the far wall, a shelf held sealed containers, clear plastic tubs filled with casings, spice packets, and cuts of meat. I haven't touched anything since I saw the new padlock. Anton said I was afraid of contaminating more evidency. Good instinct. I pulled on gloves, took out my phone, and started photographing the shelf from every angle. Then I opened each container one by one, lifting the of each seal. No foul odor, no discoloration, just pork fat and a few strands of rosemary, but something was off. I bent closer to own off the tubs. Labeled batch 11C, the pork inside looked normal enough, but nestled near the bottom, tucked into the corner, under a layer of shrink wrap, was a small glass vial. I snapped on a second glove. "Don't touch that," I said, holding up a hand as Anton leaned forward. "Stay where you are." I used a plastic spatula to slide the vial out. It was thin, medical grade, sealed with a rubber stopper. Inside was a trace amount of clear liquid. Anton's face went pale. "With hell is that?" "That," I said, "is a question for Mr. Wolfe." I packed the vial in a container I brought along. Call me cautious, but I've learned that anything unusual in meat storage usually require authentic backup. Then I collected sealed samples from 3 different sausage batches and a pair of spice packets from the shelf. "Did your uncle ever use preservatives or additives that weren't listed?" "No, never. He hated that stuff. We did everything old school, salt, time, and temperature." Then someone else brought this in. Anton looked around the feckled room like he was seeing it for the first time. "I thought maybe it was just sabotage," he said quietly. "I didn't think it went this far." I didn't either, but the evidence was starting to form a pattern. Someone had used Miser's shop, not just to ruin his name, but tossed or something they didn't want found. And now with Peric dead, Anderton targeted. The question was shifting from who wants to ruin MSR's meets Tohat. Exactly were they using it for? Back at the brownstone, I placed the vial on Wolfe's desk, like a sacrifice at an altarette. Did not immediately react, which told me 2 things. 1, he'd been expecting something of this nature, and 2, he was already 3 steps deeper into the theory than I was. Batch 11C, I said, hidden at the bottom of a pork tub. The meat looked fine, but this, I gestured at, the vial was wrapped in plastic, tucked beneath the surface. Wolfe leaned forward, took a long look, then rang the bell for Fritz. When Fritz appeared, Wolfe gave him instructions to prepare the lab setup in the kitchen. "We don't keep a full forensics lab on site. This isn't Scotland Yard, but Wolfe does have a few essentials. A microscope, a chemical kit, and a small selection of testing reagents that Fritz handles with more care than he does." Sulats, while Wolfe and Fritz tested the sample in the kitchen, I reviewed Morrissey's ledgers. Again, I didn't get far before Wolfe summoned me back in. "It's not a preservative," he said, indicating the vial. "It's a sedative, allodose barbiturate, possibly phenobarbital or odorless, tasteless in small amounts, thickened, used to subdue animals or people." I blinked. "You think someone was drugging meat not for the public? That would be scattershot and inefficient. No arcue. Believe this was used in one of 2 ways, either to prepare a specific dose for a specific individual, or to eliminate evidence. In either case, the presence of this substance in a sealed batch container is damning. It means the cold room was being used for storage," I said. "Medical storage, hidden, dangerous." Wolfe nodded. You see now why Mises' paranoia may have been justified, I said theorem, thinking out loud. The ledger had payments marked SJ private, but no sack vendor exists. Morrissey couldn't trace it. What if SJ was paying for Yusuf, the cold room, not for meat, but for this, possibly? Wolfe said, but let us take ye a step further. Suppose Eric Meza agreed to store something for a third-party purpose, under duress, perhaps for money. Suppose he later tried to withdraw from the arrangement and got killed for it. Wolfe lifted a hand. Not overtly he died of heart failure, but there are more subtle pressures than poison or violent stress. Isolation threats. The man may have been cornered by someone who used his shop as a front. I sat down and nodded. Sabotage is about destroying the evidence and silencing his nephew before finds it. Just so I tapped my pen against my notebook. You want me to push next to suspects? I want you to observe Jane Morrissey. Again, discreetly watch who she meets, and then pay a second visit to it. Rowers mentioned the sedative lightly, then observe, and Trento, later, he is less likely to flinch under pressure. Wolfe walked slowly to the globe in the corner and poured himself 2 fingers of brandy. He turned back, tone glass in hand, and narrowed his eyes. This case, Archie, is not about meat, it's about leverage. I gave him a slow nod. You think Roas's or Morrissey or both used Derek's facility for a side business? I do, and I suspect the business was neither legal nor safe. And now that the uncle's gone, I said, they need the nephew scared, silenced, or discredited before he connects the dots. Exactly, Wolfe said. Yeah, we'll find the thread. Archie tugged carefully. We are very near the center. I looked again at the tiny vial resting in its evidence pouch. So far, these sages had been talking, and the next conversation promised to be deadly. The next morning, I made a point of dressing like a man who wanted to blend in a grey sport coat, nondescript tie and shoe splished, just enough to pass for office. Casual. Wolfe had given me my marching orders the night before, and I didn't heed, reminding my first stop was Jane Morrissey's office. And this time, I was unthea to ask questions. I was there to watch. Fortunately, the building across from hers had a bakery on the ground floor with a perfect line of sight to her window. I planted myself at a corner table with a cup of black coffee and a blueberry scone. I didn't intend to eat. Morrissey's office faced the street's second floor. Blinds half drawn, I had a disentangle and a full thermos of patience at 9:18. Kemi arrived brisk and efficient as ever at 9:42, a man I didn't recognize. In medium build, grey hair, light blue windbreaker. He didn't sign in at front desk. He also didn't stay long. 10 minutes tops. When he came out, he looked around before heading west toward Broadway, walking with that fast, flat-footed pace that says, I don't want all be seen, but if I am, I want it to be over quick. I finished my coffee, dumped the scone, and followed. He did was good, not breathe. Glanced over his shoulder twice, but didn't spot me. He crossed 3 blocks, turned left into a narrow alley, and ducked into a service door marked employees only above. It was a fade dawning that read Del Murray Cooperative Storage. I leaned on a fire hydrant and took stock. Del Murray was one of those shared warehouse facilities where small businesses rent cold space for overflow goods, cheeses, wine produce. It wasn't suspicious on its own, but it was a hell off. A coincidence if Morrissey's visitor was tied to food storage and Eric Mirza had been storing contraband in his cold room. We might be looking at something bigger than just sabotage. Waited 10 minutes, long enough to jot down the plate number of the unmarked van parked nearby, then headed back to Brownstone to report. Wolfe listened without interrupting. When I finished, he closed his eyes and steepled his fingers. Morrissey's visitor, did he carry anything more? Duffel. Could have held paperwork or something heavier, you believe? He delivered funds or instructions? Maybe both, I said. But the Delmari connections more, like logistics, maybe. Moressi's involved in distribution, maybe Mizra's gold room was a link in the chain. Possibly, Wolfe murmured, we must press for the... That's what I thought, so I took the liberty of requesting a delivery. Log from Delmara's front desk told them. I was with the City Food Safety Board, they were helpful. Wolfe's brow lifted, Archie lied. I embellished mildly, I got a copy. There's no mention of Miska's, Meatson, their recent records, but 3 shipments from La Ricasa arrived in the past month, unlabeled crates, marked for Culinary Reserve holdings. Culinary Reserve, Wolfe repeated slowly. A fictitious shell, that's my bet, and Roas is hiding behind it. Wolfe rang for Fritz and told him to bring lunchlight, since our appetites were now secondary to sedatives in sausage. Then he ordered Mito, visit La Ricasa again, this time with instructions. Mention the vile Wolfe Cedo. Not accuse, merely suggest so, at 3 p.m. I was back in the West Village, the gold leaf letters still shimmered on the window, and the place was humming with late lunches. Nibbling imported olives and, pretending not to notice the price tags, Salvador Roas stood behind the counterist before, slicing a coil of morcilla with the same smug precision, gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes back again. He asked, still not shopping. Nope. Still sniffing, smell anything worth reporting? That depends. You ever use phenobarbital in your sausage? He froze only for a second, but that was all. I needed his eyes flicto, the knife in his hand, then back to me slowly. He set it down. That's a hell ophon accusation. Here's not an accusation. I said lightly, it's a question. See, someone found a vial of Festoff buried in pork at Muzzer's shop, not where customers could find it, tucked away, like it wasn't meant to. Be discovered, maybe your client's uncle had. A pharmacy habit maybe, or maybe Sumianazed, Mises' cold room, to store things they didn't want traced to them, things like unregistered pharmaceuticals. Folded his arms. You're on thin ice, Mr. Goodwin. I'm skating fine. The thing is that cold room saw a lot of action over the years, according to a note. Eric left. Your initials were on the do not forget list, along with the spice supplier and a lawyer. Makes me wonder, Eric was a bitter man, Rojas, said he. Held grudges and kept lists. Doesn't mean he wasn't crazy, but you're not crazy, are you? Mr. Rojas, you're smart enough to know that if anything ever happened to that cold room, someone might come asking questions, someone like me for the first time. Roas looked less like a smug butcher and more like a man trying to calculate the angle of exposure. I don't know what you think you're doing, he said, voice quiet now, but you're stirring ashes. Whatever Eric was into, he brought it on himself. That's a confession, if I've ever heard one. It's a warning, he said. I didn't push it. I gave him a nod, tucked the card back in my jacket, and walked out back at the brownstone. Wolfe was seated with a plait of cold tongue and mustard. I laid out the results. He listened, then spent a full minute in thought before rising to retrieve a volume from the shelf behind his desk, a ledger entry hest, opening the book from MSC's copied records. Note, this CR, Orgadec, special handling, after hours culinary reserve holdings, Indid, and if I'm not mistaken, the deck entry corresponds with the date of Anton's break-in, so someone was retrieving product. I said, or cleaning up loose ends, which now include. Anton Wolfe nodded. Once, slowly, tomorrow you will go to Morrissey's office, again, arrange a meeting under pretense of clarifying her old invoices, bring up the vile thing, observe. You think she cracked? No, Wolfe said, but she may confirm what we suspect, that this was not a simple case of sabotage. This was an illicit partnership, and now that one leg of the triangle is dead, the others are scrambling to cover their tracks. Triangle. I repeated. Morrissey Rowers, Nero Wolfe's eyes narrowed perhaps, or Sumian eels behind them, but for now we pressure the edges. Tomorrow will be instructive. He turned his gaze to the window, where last slant of light was fading across the orchids. This Archie, he sadies, no longer about reputation, it is about conspiracy, and the scent of metis, no longer the strongest odor. In the case he was right, there was some thingles in the air, now fear, and it was getting stronger the next morning. I gave myself the full Archie Goodwin treatment, shaved, polished, pressed, and caffeinataged. Enough to look efficient, but not suspicious. Wolfe had made it clear. Fear game had shifted, we weren't just peeling back sausage casings anymore, we were slicing into something tougher, with layers that didn't want to be seen. Jana Morrissey was the next point of pressure, and I had my instructions. Mention Theviel, mention the ledger, and mention none of it, like it was an accusation. I arrived at her office at 10:45 a.m. Andcott, her mid-sip of something green in a mason jar. She looked up from her desk, like she hadn't expected to see me again so soon, which was flattering considering part I play in making people nervous, Mr. Goodwin, she said, wiping the corner off her mouth with a napkin. Back so soon, looking for more financial ghosts. Ghosts don't bother me, it's the skeletons I'm interested in. I smiled, but she didn't return it this time. Do you have a question, or are you here to deliver metaphors? I took a seat. Let's talk a boutone of those mysterious entries in Miser's books. See our special handling, fattering any bells. She paused just long enough for me to know she was buying time. I assumed it was a supplier. He didn't always tell me what the codes meant. Sure, that's what I assumed too, until I found out that Larisa has been making quiet shipments under the name Culinary Reserve Holdings delivered. Todelmar Storage, same location, visited yesterday by a man I saw leaving this office. Her face didn't change, but her body stiffened just slightly. She set the jar down and leaned back. What exactly are you implying? Nothing yet, but it's odd that Rowers, your late client, and you all shared ties. Tothis Ghost Company, and now there's a vial found in Miser's cold room. Whodunit contained a sedative. Wolfe identified it as phenobarbital. She went still. I've never handled drug, she said too quickly. That would be illegal. I didn't say you did, but I think Simone used your legal know-how to create a paper. Shield, maybe a shell company, to mask logistics. You didn't thave to store the product, just make sure no one could see where it came from. You have no proof of that, not yet, I admit, but I'm gathering it, and the way I see it, you've got a choice. When the mask comes off, and it always does, do you want to be sitting on the clean side of the table, or the criminal one? She looked at me long and hard, then she stood walk to the window and stared out for a moment before speaking. I'll say this, Eric knew more than he let on, and he was afraid. Near the end he didn't tell me everything, but he left hints. The payments, the odd clients, he said once. Everyone wants cold space, but not everyone wants it for food. I thought was being dramatic. Maybe I was wrong. She turned back. That's all, Igno. That's not quite true, I said. You also know who SJ is. She blinked. I smiled. You flinched when I said it. You recognized it. You know who was paying those off the books fees. Her jaw tightened, and I thought she might kick me out, but instead she said, not over phone. If I talk, I want immunity protection. You want Wolfe, not the police. I want someone who plays chess, not checkers. Illift, with more than I came in with. Not everything, but enough to know she was in deeper than she wanted to be, and not sure anymore where the floor was. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened to my report in silence, his lips pressed so tight they could have held soup. I finished. He didn't speak immediately. He tapped the arm of his chair 3 times and then rang for Fritz. Have Sol Panzer report to me in an hour. He told Fritz I will need discreet background checks, specifically for any licenses, import permits, or pharmaceutical connections tied to CR. and to Ms. Morrissey, Saul's already on Cali. Said I figured we'd need him. Wolfe nodded faintly, approving good, and now, we bait the hook. Oh, tonight. Wolfe said yeah we'll call a meeting. I blinked. A meeting, yes, here. Invite Morrissey, Roas, and Trentathats. 3 sharks in 1 tank. You sure they've circled long enough time to bleed the water? What's the pretext? You will tell them that Anton Meza, Intensto, reopened the shop immediately, that the health board cleared him, that he has engaged Wolfe to recover damages, that we have already contacted the authority. Essen of that's true, it will be, Wolfe said calmly. If we need it to be tonight at 7:30 and you think they'll show, I think, Wolfe said, they won't be able not to. I made the calls that afternoon. Roas was the hardest to pin down. He wanted to know who else was coming, what the agenda wasn't, whether legal representation would be present. I told him he could bring a lawyer, but I wouldn't advise it, unless wanted Wolfe to ignore him completely. Trento was less slippery, he agreed. With a grumble and a fine I'll be there, like he was doing us a personal favor. Maurice said, only I'll come, but you'd better know what you're doing at 7:25. That night, the brownstone was quieter than a graveyard with good manners. Wolfe had dressed in a charcoal suit that meant business. Fritz had set out chilled water, not wine, and removed every orchid that might give the illusion of hospitality. Took the front room at 7:28. Morrissey arrived brisk and silent at 7:31. Rojas walked in with a folded coat and an arched eyebrow. Trento came 2 minutes later, smelling faintly of clove and annoyance. Wolfe didn't rise to greet them. He simply gestured to the guest chairs and waited until they were all seated. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, I have invited you here because the death of Eric Meza was not an end but a complication, one that must now be resolved, preferably before someone else dies. Morrissey flinched. Rojas said, nothing. Trento scowled. I don't know what game this is. Rojas began. It is not a game, Wolfe said. It is a trap. One of you is tangled in it, possibly more. But make no mistake, there is a central thread, and I intend to follow it. He turned his gaze to Morrissey. You knew about the shell company. Her lips parted, but she didn't deny it. You, Mr. Roas, used it to deliver illicit product to discreet cold spaces. Mr. Trento supplied the materials, possibly unknowingly, possibly not. Wolfe paused, and when Mr. MSA refused to continue or threatened to expose, you'll die. Trento rose. Now wait, just a damn sit down, Wolfe said without raising his voice, and Trento did. Wolfe glanced at me. Archie the vial. He retrieved it and placed it on the table, found in a pork container. I said, hidden beneath sealed meat. We tested its sedative, illegal, without a prescription, and a trace signature linked it to a bat-shipped underculinary reserve holdings. Wolfe spoke again softly. You may not have killed Eric Meza, but one of you, or someone close to you, used his facility to store something dangerous, and Yahave since tried to erase that trail badly. He leaned back. This is your opportunity. One of you will speak, or I will. The silence that followed was long, tense, and just beginning to crack, because Wolfe was right. We had set the trap, and someone was about to step into it. There's a particular flavor to silence in Wolfe's office when 3 guilty people are trying to calculate how guilty they look. It's not the kind of quiet that settles in. It hovers waiting to snap. And that's exactly what it did. When Jane Morrissey finally broke, she didn't shout, she didn't gesture, she just exhaled, slow and quiet. Like Summian deciding whether to fall on a sword or wait to see who else trips first. I never handled the drugs, she said, but I knew what the company was doing. Not at first. I created the shell at Rojas's request. He said it was for moving high-end food products discreetly to specialty clients' private chefs, diplomats, the kind who don't want publicity. He looked at Troz. He didn't flinch. Wolfe didn't either then. I started seeing the inconsistencies, Morrissey. Continued payments that didn't match invoices. Gaps in the ledger, deliveries made outside regular hours. When I confronted, Eric headled me I was in over my head, and that if I pushed, I'd end up in trouble. Why not go to the authorities? I asked, because by then I was already complicit, she said. Unwitting or not, my name was one document, and rowers. She turned toward him, made it clear that certain parties didn't appreciate oversight. Rowers gave her a slow, measured glance. Yeah, you accusing me of something? Jane Wolfe raised her hand, not to stop the accusation, but to reclaim the floor. You did not act. Miss Morrissey, he said, but you knew, and your silence helped conceal the operation. That is complicity, not innocence. He turned next to Trento, Hoaz, shifting in his seat like it had grown barbs. And you, Mr. Trento, did you knowingly supply restricted chemicals under falsified shipping orders? I shipped what was ordered. Trento growled. Salt, herbs, stabilizers. If something else was added along the way, I didn't authorize it. Yet your name appears prettily in the ledger's link to C.R. Wolfe, said special handling, odd volume issue. Expect us to believe you never noticed anything curious. I didn't ask questions, Trento muttered. Not my job. That, too, Wolfe said, is complicity. He shifted his gaze to Rosand. Now we arrive at the spider in the center of the web. Rojas gave a small cold smile. You're very good, Mr. Wolfe, but all you have is conjecture. So far, I haven't heard a single chargeable offense. Wolfe didn't blink. You are correct. The direct evidence is thin, which is why I summoned you, not to accuse, but to observe. He turned to Murchie. I reached down and opened the file folder I'd prepared from it. He pulled 3 documents each, a photo, the vial, the cold room shelf where it was found, and the inventory tag for batch 11C, clearly bearing the label CR, special storage. I laid them out on the desk for all 3 to see. Roaz kept his eyes locked on them a full 2 seconds longer than the others. Not long, but long. You said that label was forged, I said, but this photo was taken 2 days ago. Anton changed the locks. No one but him and me have had access. Roaz leaned forward. Are you accusing me of planting it? I'm not accusing you of anything, I said. I'm showing you what's been found. Wolfe's doing the rest, and what he's doing, Wolfe said smoothly, is drawing attention, public attention. My next caliph, none of you cooperate, will be to the FDA and the Bureau of Narcotics Enforced. I imagine that have more resources and fewer manners than I. There was another silence, but this one didn't hover. It pressed down hard. Roaz broke. It's all right, he said. Fine, yes, I used MSR's shop, but it wasn't for narcotics. It was for a product I was experimenting with, illegal in some places, not others. A natural sedative, plant-based. I was trying to corner the market on gourmet meats infused with calming properties. That's your story, I asked. It's the truth. We were early in development, the storages for test batches, nothing for sale. Morrissey structured the company to keep it off the books. Trento supplied the ingredients. Wolfe leaned forward. Ever so slightly, a plant-based sedative deed lived in vials hidden in pork, not on the market, not regulated, not documented. Alibi is in essence a confession with Garnis. Roa scowled. You can't prove it was mine, no, Wolfe said, but I can prove it was stored in a facility used, that your alias paid for, that your partners, willing or not now, confirm existed. If you do not cooperate, I will deliver that proof to the authorities Ceylon with everything else. Morrissey turned toward him, eyes sharp. Now he's right. Salvador, this ends now. We're not going to prison so you can market gourmet sleeping sausage to billionaires. Trento nodded, grumbling, "I'm done with this circus." Roa stood, his eyes moved. "From Wolfe to me, to the photos on Thedisk, let me guess." He said this was all a play, you knew I'd react. You didn't need a confession, you just needed the reaction. Wolfe tilted his head slightly, precisely. Roas gave a bitter little laugh. "You are an infuriating man. And you," Wolfe said, "are a careless one." Roas didn't argue. He turned without another word and walked out Trento, and Morrissey followed slower. Neither looked back when the door closed. Wolfe let out a breath, long and deep. Archie Saul will deliver his final report tonight. I expect confirmation, but we now have the pieces in place. You think Roas will run? I think Wolfe said that he'll try to. Clean house, but he won't get far, not with Anton's scoopration, Morris's capitulation, and the evidence. We've gathered. What about Tanton? I asked. He's still a target. He will stay here for now. I'll inform him personally. Fritz will prepare the guest room. Not the spare, no, the guest that awed me, Wolfe had already decided. Anton Moser was in the clear for Wolfe. That was as close to a benediction as anyone. Goatee stood and looked down at the photograph still on the desk. Funny. I said, it started with a nodded once, slowly, and ended with sedatives, deception, and in. Amateur chemist with entrepreneurial delusions. And you haven't even had dinner. Wolfe reached for the bell. Fritz, we will dine in 30 minutes. Something warm with mustard, as I followed him. Out of the office, I couldn't help but glance at the empty chairs. 3 suspects, 3 stories, 1 truth. We had the pieces. Now that remained was Wolfe's final move, and I had a feeling it would be checkmate. Tintin MSA arrived at the brownstone just before noon the next day, escorted by Saul Panzer, who'd been tailing him quietly since our little soiree the night before. Saul was the type of manwo could follow you across state lines without you ever realizing you'd picked up company. He gave me a small nod. Asti stepped through the door, and Anton, looking paler than a parnip in January, followed me into the office, where Wolfe was already seated and waiting. Wolfe gestured to the red chair without looking up from the file in his lap. "Sir, you will pardon the precaution of surveillance. After last night it was necessary." Anton nodded, swallowing. "I understand. Good." Wolfe said. He closed the folder with a soft snap. "Because we are at a juncture where understanding is the only thing that will keep you from danger." And Tongue glanced at me, then back to Wolfe. "They're still coming after me, aren't they?" "Not exactly," I said, taking my usual chair. "We caught them in a lie, or several thefts. But Salvador Roas has more resources than a sausage. Jepley's, and while he's bruised, he's not broken. Not yet." Wolfe interlaced his fingers. "Mr. Rocha's 4 years operated a secondary enterprise, unauthorized, unregulated, and ultimately dangerous. He used your uncle's cold storage to conceal a product that, though perhaps not overly criminal in its early stages, veered into illegality through deception, lack of foresight, and willful concealment. I knew something was off." Anton said, "But I never." Wolfe raised a finger. "No need to protest. You are not implicated. In fact, you may now be our most important witness." "Witness to what exactly?" "To the pattern," I said. "Yaknu, the shop you saw, the orders you saw, who came and went, and with what source uncovered. We've got enough to press the case if you're willing to testify." Anton took a deep breath, then nodded. "Slowly, I'll do it. I don't want to live scared, and I won't let them use my uncle's name like that." Wolfe approved with the slightest incline of his head. "Very well then, let us complete the picture." Hugh opened the folder again and drew out eighth stack of papers. Saul's findings. Mr. Panzer confirmed what we suspected. Wolfe said. Culinary Reserve Holdings is a shell company registered under an alias traceable to Roas's Restaurant Holdings. Its storage accounts at Del Mare are paid in cash filtered through layered business fronts and used only at night. Deliveries match by date and quantity. entries in your uncle's secret ledger. Anton sat straighter. So the whole thing was real, indeed, Wolfe said. And more than that dangerous, the compound found in your cold room, identified by Fritz with Mr. Panzer's assistance, is no simple sedative. It is a non-FDA-approved compound derived from a South American plant with psychotropic properties. In small doses it produces calm and mild euphoria. In larger doses, confusion and memory gaps. Anton stared at him. They were putting that in thesosage, not directly. Wolfe said it was being tested on whom we cannot yet prove butit's mere presence in food storage. Space is a federal violation, and its concealment is obstruction, and Anton asked, did they kill him? Wolfe's voice softened slightly. We cannot say for certain. He died of heart failure, but we now know he was under severe pressure, likely emotional, possibly physical. He may have attempted to cut off their arrangement. Hence the ledger note, the warning, the rearranged spice rack. Someone sent him a message. That message may well have hastened his death. Anton stared at the floor for a moment. No one spoke. Wolfe cleared his throat. But now we are in possession of a strategy. Tonight Mr. Roas has scheduled a private tasting for potential investors. He intends to unveil a new product line. Let me guess, ice-ade sausage that helps you sleep precisely, and we, Mr. Goodwin, will be in attendance. I blinked. You're leaving the house? Don't be absurd, Wolfe scoffed. You will attend with Mr. Panzer and Mr. Meza. If he agrees. Anton hesitated, then gave a slow nod. If it'll help stop him, I'm in. Wolfe handed me an envelope. Inside was a folded invitation, addressed not to me, but to a Mr. H.L. Green, culinary consultant of Wolfe's alter egos, dusted off for just such an occasion. You'll go in as Green, Wolfe said, with Anton as your associate. Sol will observe from the perimeter. You'll record the event. If any substance is introduced or referenced, we'll have it. And when the time comes, Sol ask a single question: is this product sourced through CR? Their action will suffice unless he throws a sausage at me, in which case we'll sagely be sure it's not spiked. That evening, dressed in a crisp grey suit and carrying a notebook monogrammed HLG, I accompanied Anton to a narrow warehouse loft on the far west side. The invitation had gotten us past a clipboard-toting woman with designer glasses and a suspicious smile inside. It smelled like smoke, rosemary, and money. There were perhaps 15 guests, slick-haired investors, food bloggers, and a few men with the hard stares of corporate attorneys. In the center of the room, Roa stood behind a butcher block, slicing coins of a sausage so delicately spiced it smelled more like perfume than pork. He greeted, just offered samples, and delivered small speeches about restorative meats and culinary serenity. Anton kept close hands in his pockets, trying to blend in. Saul was across the street in a parked car, earpiece in, ready to alert Wolfe, all the cops, if things got dicey. When Rojas finally turned toward, his smile faltered just briefly. Mr. Green, he said, a pleasure. I nodded. Fascinating aroma, lavender and a hint of valerian root, a calming touch. I took the offered list and pretended to sample it. And the distribution, local or through CR, had blinked just once, but it was enough. I'm sorry, he said. Did you say CRI? Smiled. These, I understand, they specialize in specialty products. Private storage, discreet shipping. His eyes darkened just for a flicker. I'm not sure where you that from. Ms. Meets, I said just loudly enough for the nearest investor to glance over. Roas's lips thinned. I think this conversation's over, he said. Actually, I said, stepping back, it's just beginning. The door opened. Sol Panzantard, followed by two plainclothes agents. Wolfe had been saving like fine cognac. Their badges came out fast. Rosa don't run. He just stood still, watching the room, as though memorizing who had seen what. As they took him away, Anton let out a slow breath. Is it done? He did. asked me almost. I said Wolfe gets the last word. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened to my report with closed eyes and folded hands. When I finished, he said nothing for a full minute, then send the full file to the district attorney. Inth morning include Moressi's cooperation. She may still face sanctions, but her compliance warrants consideration. He stood and walked to the globe of Fritz. He called dinner. Fritz appeared instantly, roast duck with cherry glaze. Wolfe turned to me. Anton Masa may now reclaim his name. The ledger is closed. Sausages speak no longer. I nodded, and the cold room. Wolfe allowed himself faintest smile. Let it be scrubbed. Some truths are better buried. Sir Justice has spoken. And that was that. Another case, cracked not with violencia pursuit, but with logic, patience, and a very suspicious sausage. The following morning dawned cold and quiet. The way New York occasionally repents for being itself. There was Athen mist hanging in the street trees, and the paper boys were late, which Wolfe noticed immediately. Fritz's breakfast tray was precisely on time, but the Gazette had yet to arrive, and that disrupted the sacred morning rhythm enough to make Wolfe glower at the toast like it had failed him personally. I'd barely settled into my coffee when rang. I answered in my usual Dolit tones, and after a brief exchange, handed the receiver over to Wolfe with a smirk. It's the district attorney's office. I said they're calling with gratitude. Don't let it go to your head. Wolfe accepted the phone with a grunt. Yes, he listened, eyes closed, lips pursed. He gave precisely one, indeed two, yes, quite, and a final, that is satisfactory thing. He hung up, folded his hands over his stomach, and leaned back. Well, it prompted. They have secured a search warrant for the storage facilities under CR's name. Rois's product samples tested positive for controlled compounds, and Morris's testimony has been deemed credible enough to negotiate a plea in exchange for further cooperation, which means Wolfe said the operation is dismantled. The substance will be traced to its point of origin, the shell companies dissolved, and the matter of Eric Mers's death appended with an asterisk contributing stress leading to cardiac failure. I nodded. Justice Wolfe style. Wolfe's gaze drifted toward the orchids. I do not favor righteousness, Archie. I favor order. That sounded about right, and it lined up with new tone in the house. The case wasn't just closed, it was cleaned, sanitized, put back on the shelf with Felabel facing outward. But that didn't mean we were done. At around 11, Tomza returned to the brownstone this time. He looked like a man who had slept, even brought a box of pastries, which Fritz accepted with the solemnity of a court usher. Receiving evidence, Wolfe didn't rise to greet him. Naturally, I wanted to thank you, Anton said, as Hesset. Both of you are necessary. Wolfe murmured, your uncle, despite his eccentricities, was not a fool. He knew something would outlive him. You honored that instinct. Anton looked down at his hands. I was angry with him for being secretive, for not trusting me. Fear breeds secrecy, Wolfe said, often at the expense of those closest. Anton nodded then looked at me. So what happens now? You testify if needed, I said. Keep your nose clean, don't rent out your cold room to charming strangers with medical side hustles. And if someone tries to deliver anything in vials, call me first. Wolfe sighed. Mr. Goodwin, must you always convert serious reflection into sarcasm? It's how I keep my arteries open. Wolfe ignored me and turned back to Anton. Yom, return to your shop once the health department issues a new certificate. I suggest you rebrand slightly, a mode's name change. It will distinguish your operation from your uncle's shadow. Anton nodded. I've been thinking about that. Something simpler, MSCR and Son, even if the Son is more metaphor than fact. A sound instinct, Wolfe said. Aunt unto Studio've both done more than I could have asked. If you ever want sausage, real sausage, you've got a lifetime tab, Wolfe shuddered. Let us not ruin a morning by speaking of pork. When he'd gone, Wolfe turned to me with a look that meant the conversation was over, but that I'd better hang around anyway. I poured a second cup of coffee and said, you know, I keep thinking about that spice rack. The one that got rearranged during the break-in. You think that was meant to confuse Emza or send a message? Wolfe considered symbolic. I believe a calculated disruption, the equivalent of moving furniture in one's home, a violation of intimacy. Meant town settle worked, yes, and it gave him the final nudge to reach out. I set the cup down. I still don't get why rowers didn't just cut ties and vanish. He'd already hit him. The operation pretty well, because Wolfe said arrogance is as addictive as Sani. Narcotic, he believed himself untouchable. Even when cornered, he had pito by time, but time is a commodity he failed to launder. I grinned. Nice one, Wolfe, grunted Fritz from the kitchen. Fritz called back, luncheon in 10 minutes. Brownstone returned to its usual rhythm, which is to say perfectly still except for me. But the case had left a mark. It wasn't often we dealt with something that didn't involve murder, but still managed to throb with tension, betrayal, and the kind of danger that didn't need a gun to feel fatal. Just before lunch, I checked the front Halfa mail and found an envelope addressed in a looping hand. Inside was a thank ya note from Jane Moresi, handwritten, no signature, just initials, and a sentenza that caught my eye. Even shadows are cast by something solid. Thank you for illuminating this one. I brought it into the office and dropped it on Wolfe's desk, read it, said nothing, then quietly she landed on her feet, or a firm yes. Lunch was roast chicken with lemon risotto. Wolfe was pleased with the texture, which meant he chewed in silence. Ah, blessing. I didn't disturb after we returned to the office, where he resumed reading a monograph on soil composition. I resumed pretending to organize files. It was a quiet day. No new clients, no sausage scandals, no chemical conspiracies, just a city outside ticking forward and a brownstone inside returning to equilibrium. Wolfe didn't speak again until mid-afternoon. Then, without looking up, he said, Archie, remind me to call Mr. Hewitt about the orchid hybrid. I believe the bloom is ready. Will do, and order more typewriter ribbons. You planning to type something? No, he said, but I dislike buying gun prepared, which, when you think about it, had been the theme of the week. Be 5 o'clock. The day had folded itself up like a napkin, neat and clean. The desk was clear, the case was closed. The world was once again safe from seductive sores. For now, and Wolfe, having defeated crime without leaving his chair, leaned back, sighed deeply, and reached for a book on Roman history. Some men wage war with swords. Wolfe preferred syllables and silence, and eventually dinner at 6 o'clock. Sharp. That evening, the brownstone settled into the calm it knew best. Measured footsteps overhead from Fritz in the kitchen, the faint scrape of silverware being polished, and Nero Wolfe ensconced in his chair with a book thick enough to double as a door's stop. The house was peaceful again, not because the world outside had calmed down, but because Wolfe had bent it through sheer logic and stubbornness back into order. I was in the office finishing my report. It's a habit I've kept even when Wolfe doesn't ask for it. There's summer things tisfing about capturing a case in black and white after it's been wrestled into submission, documenting who lied, whore cracked, and who walked away with their dignity mostly intact. I just typed Thephanol line subject. Declined to press charges, but the evidence was forwarded to the appropriate authorities. Cus considered. Resolved as of 4:47 p.m. Per Mr. Wolfe. When Wolfe spoke without lifting his eyes from the page, you omitted the psychological eye. Didn't even glance up. Not my department. I leave the brooding moral conclusions to Yoe. Want a line about the fragile complexities of human duplicity? I'll work one in something about sausages, the symbols of modern vice, that would be trid. Then I'll go with criminals, should I stick to embezzlement. The meat business is too messy, marginally better. He closed Eith's book with a soft thud and looked at me. There is something distinctly American, he said, about conflatin Genovian with exemption from law. Ross believed that his product, because it was new, existed in a moral vacuum, that its utility excused its illegality. That is not entrepreneurship, it is cowardice. In jargon, you're on a roll, Wolfe sniffed. Morrissey at least understood her complicity. Trento lacked the wit to realize his but Roas. He believed himself brilliant, untouchable, that makes him dangerous. He's in custody now, temporarily, Wolfe said. But such men always resurface in another form, another trade you want me to keep tabs on. Him no, Wolfe said, folding his hands. Let the city absorb him. But remember, his type Archie. You will see it again, I nodded. File that under menhotry. Too hard to reinvent sausage. Wolfe grunted, which, under generous interpretation, meant agreement. The bell rang for dinner. Fritz was never late, and he didn't ring lightly. I stood and stretched tonight's menu. I asked boiled beef with mustard. Wolfe said without emotion, for it felt it appropriate. I raised an eyebrow, symbolic. Much it was not my suggestion, Wolfe muttered. In the drawing room the silver gleamed. The beef was tender, the mustard sharp, and the bread precisely sliced whole. Said nothing forth first 10 minutes, and I followed his lead, not out of reverence, mind you. I just respect the sanctity of food, especially when the case we just closed had spent most of its time crawling through kitchens and chilling in backroom refrigerator surely. Through the meal, Wolfe set down his fork and reached for his wine. Edis liked the phrase, victimless crime, he said. It is invariably used by someone hoping to avoid consequence, not by someone reflecting on harm. I took a sip of water. You think Rojas harmed people? Of course. Indirectly, certainly. But he compromised the trust that governs food. Archie. Trust that what we eat is safe, is honest. His deception was not in this pound alone, it was in the pretense of offering nourishment. You do get philosophical when mustard's involved, Ejet, accurate. He returned to his beef after dinner. We returned to the office. E pulled the ledger from Morrissey's folder one last time. It still fascinated me, not just because of what it said, but because of what it hinted at, the way people tried to bury truth in codes in a shalcent careful placement. You ever wonder, I asked, Wolfe, how many more like it are out there? Ledgers in drawers, cold rooms, hiding things besides meat, no need, Towender. Wolfe said, there are thousands. Truth is not rare, Archie, it is simple. Welcome. He looked at me, and his expression was not so much stern as certain. That is why we exist. I nodded. Toddig it up to extract it, Wolfe said cleanly, without emotion but not without judgment. I leaned back in my chair. The streetlights outside were casting a soft gold blur across the windows. Another day was done, another case closed, and for the moment all was still until doorbell rang. I glanced at Wolfe, who did not move, expecting someone. Are we ever? I went to the front door and opened it to reveal a slim man in his 40s, sharply said, holding a paper-wrapped package. Mr. Goodwin? He asked. That's me. This was Centivore from Miscus. Meat's personal delivery. I signed for it, took the package, and thanked him back. In the office, I unwrapped. The paper inside was a single sausage wrapped in butcher's wax, sealed with twine, and a note written in Anton Miser's hand, the first of the new batch, clean, honest. You'll taste the difference, handed the note to Wolfe, who sniffed the sausage like a man assessing more than just its ingredients. Well, he said, that remains to be seen. He set it aside like it was a book to be read later. Will you try it? I asked. If Fritz prepares it, Wolfe said, perhaps in a few days. I smiled. You'll forgive sausage eventually? I forgive nothing, Wolfe said, but I make allowances for redemption. That was as close as he would come to sentiment, and from him it meant the case was truly over, not just in fact, but in memory. I sat down, opened Ed's drawer, and filed the last folder under MSA Anton Cold Room. Matter, Wolfe reached for another book outside. The street hummed with the rhythm of the city that never bothers to rest, but herein the brownstone peace reigned again, until the next knock, until the next strange phone call, until Summian's carefully arranged world came undone by greed, by guilt, or by something as simply as a spice jar moved into the left. We'd be ready, we always were. It was 3 days after the last visitor rang our doorbell, and 2 days after Wolfe finally allowed Fritz to slice and pan-sear this sausage. Anton had sent that the full weight of the case settled into place. It came not with a phone call or knock, but in the form of Wolfe himself, clearing his throat precisely once, his way of telling me he was ready to deliver a pronouncement, was seated naturally in his chair behind the desk I had just returned from delivering our compiled report to the DA's office, along with copies of Morrissey's ledgers, Saul's photo documentation, and my own field notes. The authorities were now waist deep in cause dirty logistics trail, and Rowers was being arraigned that very afternoon. But this wasn't about legal closure, this was Wolfe's true end, his conclusion. Archie hissed with the formality of a priest beginning a homily. Do you know what truly unraveled Mr. Rowers's scheme? Thepert, where he kept his poison in a sausage tub, or where he thought a fake LLC could hide a sedative pipeline. Nero Wolfe, said the spice rack. I blinked. You're serious, of course. I'm serious. It was the key signal. I sat forward. You think that was the first clue, the real first clue, Wolfe said. Consider the only sign Eric MSA left before his death was a scrolled note and a rearranged spice rack. A man as obsessive as Misa, whose legacy was based on tradition and precision, does not allow his workspace to be disrupted unless he's sending a message. But the rack didn't say anything precisely. It was silence made visual. He couldn't speak openly, so he made Kyasan the one place it would be noticed by the one person who might understand. Anton Inadado K. So the spice rack was the trigger, but why not just leave a letter? Because I didn't trust paper. Wolfe said how you saw the ledgers coded fragmentary lived in a world where trust was a liability, but he trusted the message would be seen. I folded my arms. So you're saying Eric knew he was being watched? Yes, and in those final weeks he tried to warn his nephew subtly. He changed the locks, he pulled the ledger page, had disrupted the space, but he did not realize how close Roas was to removing him entirely. His death was natural, yes, but under unnatural pressure, and that makes it culpable. Wolfe reached into the drawer and took out the note again, the one with the initials Senior D, TJM. 3 people, he said, linked by one operation. None of them trusted each other, and when one link broke, Eric, they each tried to wrest control of the narrative. Trento, through silence, Morrissey, through legal detachment, Roas, through obfuscation, and all 3 failed. They did, Wolfe said, because they misunderstood the power of simplicity. A single spice rack told more truth than the combined lies that was Wolfe. All right, making meaning out of misplacement. He picked up the final page of the case file and signed it with a flourish. Then he leaned back and closed his eyes. You were right, Archie, he said. I blinked. Excuse me, your instincts about the break-in, about Rojas, about the shell company, you aired in tone occasionally, but not in substance. Well, I said, if that isn't the Wolfe equivalent of a standing ovation, I will not repeat it, he warned. Understood. He paused. And what if Anton Fritz says he's reopened the shop under the new name, cleaned top to bottom, health board approved it, he's got a waiting list already. Apparently honesty tastes better, as it should, Wolfe said. So that's it. We're back to orchids and omelettes until the next fool knocks. Wolfe said, which they always do outside the city, kept humming 1,000 stories pulsed through its blocks, some petty, some poisoned, some perfectly cured, but here, in the brownstone, order had returned, Wolfe had spoken, justice had been reasoned into place, and perhaps, most miraculous of all, I'd gone nearly 3 full days without getting hit shot at, or insulted by a suspect with olive oil on his hands. As I filed the last oft paperwork, I allowed myself one small observation: say what you will. I said to no 09 particular, but the next time someone shows up at our door with a sausage and a secret, I'm charging extra from behind. Wolfe grunted double, he said.